The Cold War is different from other wars because it's not only 41 years, but it's also mysterious and the deaths are unknown, and many people feared the start of World War III. The Cold War started off with the Berlin blockade, and it was one of the first major international crises. The Berlin blockade was an attempt in 1948 by the Soviet Union to limit the ability of France, Great Britain, and the US to travel to their sectors of Berlin, which lay within Russian-occupied East Germany. The West wanted to revive the economy, but the Soviets didn't want that because West would be more powerful than the East. The West zones decided to do their plan, so the Soviets built a wall to prevent the East to flee to the West for freedom. On November 9, 1989, Germany reunited and families and friends finally saw each other and cried tears of joy. Now we move on to the Korean War, which happened on June 1950 and lasted till July 1953. North Korea invaded South Korea so they can have total control and be a communist country. South Korea called US for help and the North Koreans called the Soviets for help, which caused tension between the two countries. An international crisis happened on May 1960 when the Soviets shot down an American U-2 spy plane in the Soviet airspace. The Soviets ended up capturing the pilot Francis Powers and wanted President Eisenhower to admit that he had been flying spy missions for several years. They ended up convicting Powers to 10 years in prison, but he ended up serving 2 years because the U.S. swapped the captured Soviet Union agent for Powers. This was known as the spy swap. The Bay of Pigs all started out when Castro came into power and wanted nothing to do with America. America received sugar and owned cattle ranches, mines, and utilities from Cuba, but Castro decided to give the sugar to the Soviets. In January 1961, U.S. decided to give up their relations to Cuba and planned an invasion to show that he really wanted to win this Cold War, except it didn't turn out as he planned because the Cuban troops outnumbered the invaders, which caused them to surrender. The Cuban Missile Crisis was one of the closest that the Soviets and the U.S. ever came to fighting. It all started out with an American U-2 pilot that captured a photo of an SS-4 medium-range ballistic missile being assembled for installation. Kennedy immediately took action and called the executive committee to discuss what to do. Kennedy televised his plan and told the U.S. that they'll barricade Cuba and that they'll do whatever they can to neutralize this perceived threat to the national security, even if it involved nuclear warfare. Everyone around the world was waiting for Soviets' response while Americans feared nuclear warfare and supplied on food, gas, etc. The Soviets agreed to remove the missiles, while the U.S. agreed to never invade Cuba and to remove the missiles out of Turkey. Even though the Cold War came to an end in 1985, the tension is still going on between the two.